Hi, you're watching Goodfellas History. I'm one of your hosts, Garrett.
I'm Nick.
Davis. Oh,
And today, I wanted to talk about public banks and how amazing they are. And I feel like they don't get talked about a whole lot. So, I have a few articles we're going to go over. So, this first one comes from the the publicbankinginstitute.org. And basically, it's just kind of talking about what is a public bank and why it serves its constituents. Or its communities, its people. So, what is a public bank? So, the four pillars of a public bank: holds a bank charter, accepts deposits, reinvests profits in the public interest, and creates money as credit loans to benefit the public if it represents. All right. What is public banking? Public banking is banking operated in the public interest through institutions owned by the people through their representative governments. Public banks can exist at all levels, from local to state to national. Any governmental body which can meet local banking requirements may, theoretically, create such a financial institution. Public banking is distinguished from private banking in that its mandate begins with the public's interest. Privately owned banks, by contrast, have shareholders who generally seek short-term profits as their highest priority. Public banks are able to reduce taxes within their jurisdictions because their profits are returned to the general fund of the public entity. The costs of public projects undertaken by governmental bodies are also greatly reduced because public banks do not need to charge interest to themselves. Eliminating interest has been shown to reduce the cost of such projects on average by 50%.
yeah, that's way cool.
Mm-hmm. So we'll kind of move down. It only goes down to here, so I'll just read this whole thing. So the next section: why public banks? Today, cities and states put their money in Wall Street banks, allowing those banks to leverage our public funds in order to dominate the financialized, speculative economy rather than reinvesting them in our communities. At the same time, cities and states borrow money from Wall Street institutions and bondholders at high interest rates and pay large fees to keep money in their banks. This is not a cost-effective way to do business. Cities and states could be keeping their public dollars and leveraging them from their own community needs. With city and state-owned banks, we cut out Wall Street middlemen. Our community's cash stays home to benefit us. Bank fees are eliminated, interest costs drop, and public bank profits are reinvested into our communities. Public banks can help us create the communities we want. We want parks, good roads, safe bridges, clean energy, and housing we can afford. We want lower interest rates for local small business loans, local control of our tax dollars, investment in our local communities, and ethical and transparent financial institutions managing our public funds. Public banks can be the financial engine that makes this happen for our communities. And then this last thing here, and then maybe we can talk about it a little bit, is 10 key facts of public banking. So, public banks, number one, are owned by the people of a state, city, community, or nation. Number two, serve as the depository for local government funds, city or state taxes, fees, etc. 3, are required to benefit the public by serving local community needs. 4, can save state and local governments millions or even billions of dollars by cutting out middlemen and private shareholders, eliminating fees, and financing projects at lower interest rates. 5, reinvest bank profits into the community, providing a new source of income for cities and states and a source of funding for projects such as infrastructure, renewable energy, and affordable housing. 6, are run not by politicians, but by qualified bankers serving a public mission. 7, provide accountability and transparency to the public for bank decisions, avoiding the risks of Wall Street's speculative gambling. Number 8, create new jobs and spur economic growth by supporting local small businesses. Number 9, partner with and support rather than competing with local community banks. And number 10, can lend during times of stress and crisis, helping to sustain a healthy local economy.
Mm-hmm. That one seems huge to me.
Yeah. And I saw this. It's not in any of the articles that are on here, I think. But while researching this, I saw something like during the 2008 financial crisis, all over the world, public banks for the most part, suffered the least
Mhm.
because they're just kind of operating within their own communities. And so, it makes sense to me.
What public banks really are is an institution for credit and finance that is not tied to the financial sector. It's an alternative. It's the equivalent of the post office versus FedEx.
Mm-hmm.
Both provide the same kind of services, but one is not operating for profit. They're operating for service.
Yeah.
It's a service-based. And the benefit of that is that, in reality, in truth, these banks can still function just the same as any other bank. It's just now there's no fees. There's less incentives for them to behave in a way that normal banks are.
Yeah. And so, real quick, I just remembered, I was going to include this article, Nick, with the sources I sent you, but I didn't, so I can send you this one as well.
Okay.
But this is bankingoncolorado.org, and they just have really great graphics. Can you guys see this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is with a public, public or the state banks. So right here you have the taxpayer. So they pay taxes to the state, obviously. The state government invests in the state banks, or the public banks. The public banks invest in state projects, which returns profit back to the state government and also provides jobs to the taxpayer. And now I want to contrast that with our current system.
Yeah.
So this is a graphic of our current system. So you have the taxpayer pays taxes to the state, obviously. The state invests into Wall Street, and Wall Street, they have derivatives, they have currency speculation, and they have the stock market. Goes back to profit to Wall Street, and then Wall Street gives a modest return back to the state government.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not getting the jobs from the local, local state projects to the taxpayer, and it's just
It almost
like
as
you
if
can
it siphons
completely.
out. It's
Sorry,
almost
what was
as
that?
if it siphons out all the wealth in that area.
Yeah, and gives it to Wall Street. I mean, with the public banks, you completely take out the Wall Street a portion of it, and you keep that money in the communities. And so, yeah.
The Glass-Steagall Act that came out in the 1930s during the New Deal was designed to basically give us two kinds of banks. One kind of bank would be that model if you go down below. If you go back to that model that you just had.
Yeah.
One kind would be that. And instead of the state, it'd be just individuals.
Yeah.
And then the other kind would be actually more analogous to the public bank. It'd still be run for a profit, but it would be much more analogous to this, where the states would actually invest in these local banks. There were investment banks and there were commercial banks. Investment banks were more like the latter, what we just saw, and commercial banks were more like this. Now, reality is that there still would be a for-profit incentive, so there'd still be a little bit more wealth, but that wealth would be localized to that local bank.
Yep.
It'd be regional. It'd be in that location. In the 1990s, when Glass-Steagall was repealed, Wall Street, the investment banks, were able to go down, like right here. When the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed, requiring the clear separation of banking operations from risky investment banking operations and from insurance and brokerage firms, the repeal of Glass-Steagall allowed mergers of huge banks, insurance companies, and investment banks and brokers, greatly increasing the risk of banking depositors in our financial system, heavily contributing to the collapse of 2008. And that's because all these finances were intertwined with one another. The whole point of separating these institutions from commercial activities and investment activities was to make sure that the commercial activities were operating separately. Like, it was protecting the rest of the economy. Like, people weren't worried about, people investing in the stock market and losing out. I mean, that was just the price of playing it and willing and dealing. But with this basically allowed these investors to tie entire industries' fates to their successes or failures.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, they covered that in this article. Yeah, like I said, I didn't include this, but I did want to go there because I really love the state bank system versus the current system graphics and kind of how they talk about it.
I'd love to have a public bank. I think every state should have a public bank.
That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
and so, and this whole video, it's like a almost 8-minute video. It's these two guys kind of talking. I really encourage people to go to bankingoncolorado.org, what are public banks and how do they benefit us, and watch this video because it's very informative, but we're going to kind of move on from that. Mm-hmm. So the reason why I'm talking about this is I saw a clip of AOC talking about how basically, because she introduced a bill last year in October of 2020 with Rashida Tlaib, kind of paving the path for public banks and kind of getting the ball rolling with that. And people were like criticizing her and attacking her for things that weren't even in the bill. So I kind of want to read what she had to say because it was very, I thought it was really funny. So yeah. I'm going to kind of scroll down to her quote. So Ocasio-Cortez said, "I learned a while ago, when I first got to Congress, I thought, man, people will definitely study what they're talking about here. Then I got here and realized that a lot of my colleagues don't even read the bills that they are commenting on."
Oh my gosh.
She then held up a copy of the bill and said, "But for anyone who's curious, it's right here at the desk." We're making lots of statements that have nothing to do with the legislation, and frankly, if I made comments that very publicly demonstrated that I didn't read the legislation I was discussing, I'd be embarrassed, but that is an aside. So...
yeah.
She's
queen.
Completely roasting the GOP for not even reading her freaking
everybody, bill. This is the reason why I just want to get up and slap Jimmy Dore in the face.
Yeah.
He talks about her not being spunky. What is she doing right there?
She's always, kind of...
She's basically calling these people out.
She's had fiery speeches on the House floor,
she's just calling these people out, straight up,
Yeah, she's awesome.
And the thing is that it's done in a way that does not upset the wine moms.
Yeah.
So this is how you use newspeak in a way that is helpful for progressive issues. Go back to that statement real quick. I know I'm really, it's a pain, but.
It starts up here and then it ends down here.
Go back up. I have learned a while ago, when I first got to Congress, I thought, man, people definitely study what they're talking about here. Then I got here and realized people don't even. A lot of my colleagues don't even read the bills that they're commenting on.
Yeah.
Meaning that they're full of shit.
She's
basically saying that they're full of shit without saying that they're full of shit.
But they're basically saying, because people hear public banks and they're like, oh my god, they want to get rid of the private banks. And as we'll get into, because I'll go over their bill, her and Rashida Tlaib's bill that they proposed last year, that's not what it is. It's basically just an option, and it's also not even creating public banks. It's just basically giving incentives to get the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. But they just read the title, and then they're like, oh my god, this is what you're doing. And it's like, dude, read the legislation. That's not what this is. But... yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you guys can still hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just listening now, honestly. I'm very curious about a lot of this.
If we don't have anything else to talk about with that, we can go into the actual proposal now.
Yeah, please. I'm so curious.
Okay. So this is a Vox article, and it was last updated October 30th of 2020. So this is last year, and we'll get into it. I have an update from this year, but we'll kind of just, it'll talk a little bit about things that aren't current. So just kind of want to throw that out there. So this is, like I said, a Vox article exclusive. Rashida Tlaib and AOC have a proposal for a fairer, greener financial system, public banking. Rashida Tlaib and AOC are rolling out a plan to help create public banks across the country. Now, it's helping to create them. It's not actually creating them. And yeah, we'll get into it. All right, so a public option, but for banking. That's what Reps Rashida Tlaib and AOC are proposing in a new bill unveiled on Friday. The Public Banking Act, first shared with Vox, wouldn't create those options by itself, but would foster the creation of public banks across the country by providing them a pathway to getting started, establishing an infrastructure for liquidity and credit facilities for them via the Federal Reserve, and setting up federal guidelines for them to be regulated. Essentially, it would make it easier for public banks to exist and would give some of them grant money to get started. So yeah, it's basically, like I said, getting the ball rolling, giving incentives for states to create these public banks, but it's not, they're not going to sign this and then boom, it's just 1,000 public banks all over the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So while it sounds a little wonky, whatever. The basic idea is to make it possible for state and local governments, local businesses, and people to do business with public banks, which theoretically would be more motivated to do public good and invest in their communities than private institutions, which are out for profit. One public bank exists in North Dakota, and there is a growing movement to create more of them across the country. California recently passed a law allowing cities and counties to create and sponsor public banks. I think that was back in 2019.
So that's exciting too, because California has one of the largest economies. I
think it's the seventh largest economy in the world. If it wasn't,
it's massive. So that's super exciting.
And this will just improve that even more because you're keeping a lot of that revenue just in California, and it's a good idea.
Which would shut down a lot of the conservative arguments of just look at LA and California. It's just a trash heap.
The places
I think that, honest to God, that the reason why California began looking like a shithole was largely due to the fact that A, the state stopped funding as much public programs as it once had, and B, that began to happen in the fucking 90s when Wall Street was beginning to take over.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the wealth or whatever money that was already in these regions were being extracted and not being reinvested in these local communities.
But honestly, even these conservatives in red states criticizing California for being a shithole need to realize that they help subsidize those red states. I mean...
Well, not just that. What shithole? People, it's turning into a shithole. What do you mean? The shitholes that are in California have been shitholes for decades. What the fuck are you talking about?
Look at the homeless and crime. It's you don't support ending homelessness, though. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but I've heard these arguments all my life. There's homelessness in Austin, Texas, and crime in Austin, Texas, and Houston. They're comparable. Actually, if you look at the statistics, they're comparable. It's almost as if proportion of population and public population density have an impact on the amount of crime that actually happens in a given area.
Y'all have also seen the education rate in the Bible Belt, so let's not get too crazy here.
Well, I know, but the reality here is that, this is such a dead argument. I'd like people just to, not even push back on, I'd like people to push back on it by just pointing that out. What else is new? This is, California has been portrayed this way since California stopped being a Republican state, funny enough.
Yep.
No, I'm very curious to see what a public bank would be like with that amount of an economy. That's exciting.
Well, I think it'd be kind of interesting to see how the local GDP of California is faring since they've done that, because that's going to be so
it looks like they don't have crazy amounts of public banks or anything yet, but it looks like
cities.
I don't think they have one yet.
But cities and local counties though.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested in seeing how those cities are doing and those local counties are doing with these public banks.
Yeah. So I think they just gave the go-ahead. I think they're still maybe figuring it out because I haven't seen there actually be a public bank in California. I think they're just the one that exists right now in North Dakota.
Yeah, it looks like the problem is that it got pushed through during the COVID-19 pandemic, so that's probably slowed it down a lot too.
Yeah, so here, let's just kind of continue here. So we have a quote from Rashida. Economic stability is really truly tied in with access to this type of banking, Tlaib said in an interview with Fox. It's to try to create stable neighborhoods and communities. The proposal lands in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has shed light on many inefficiencies in the American system, including banking. Take the Paycheck Protection Program, for example. It used the regular banking system as an intermediary, which ultimately meant that bigger businesses and those with pre-existing relationships with those banks were prioritized over others. Some smaller businesses missed out, with many owners saying they were denied loans for even a few $1,000s. The discrepancy hit black-owned businesses particularly hard. So, yeah, I do think, well, it doesn't say it here. I bet creating a public bank during a pandemic, they probably weren't, like, super on top of it. Mm-hmm. But I do think it will in the next few years. I feel like we will see some of the public banks in California start to pop up.
Oh, that's so exciting. I'll be very curious to look at some, like, numbers of that later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from what I understand, the bank in North Dakota has been around since 1919. And I think I haven't seen approval ratings, but from what I understand, people really love it. I mean, it's been around over 100 years now. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, we'll keep going here. The intent of the proposal is to try to guarantee a more equitable recovery by providing an alternative to Wall Street banks. That's another thing too. This is just an option. We're not getting rid of private banks.
Yeah.
It's just an option.
It's a public option.
Yeah. Providing an alternative to Wall Street banks for state and local governments, businesses, and ordinary people, and by ensuring such banks provide services to historically excluded and marginalized groups. The public banking bill also does double duty as a climate bill, and this is really fascinating. It would prohibit public banks from investing in or doing business with the fossil fuel industry.
That's way cool. And I feel like conservatives couldn't really get mad about this because this is just getting introduced into the marketplace of ideas, you know. So
it's just an option.
Yeah, it's just an option. Just competition, baby.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what it is, and we'll talk about competition between public and private banks a little later in this article.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I would hit the highlights, and we'll keep the ball moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, man, sure. You're getting me all excited. I'm getting like really curious to see some of this.
Yeah, there will be. I'm not going to go over. This article is really, really long, so I'll try to not go over the whole thing. But this part in particular it has a lot of good stuff in it, so I'll just kind of keep going for now. So, public banks are uniquely able to address the economic inequality and structural racism exacerbated by the banking industry's discriminatory policies and predatory practices, Ocasio-Cortez said in a statement. She said that she also believes public banks could facilitate the use of public resources to construct a myriad of public goods, including affordable housing and local renewable energy projects. Public banks empower state and municipalities to establish new channels of public investment and help solve systemic crises. Other countries have various forms of public banking in operation and have different regulatory schemes set up for them than commercial banks do, says Rowan Gray, a law professor at Willamette University. But, he said, this proposal is particularly comprehensive and supportive. Okay, so it kind of goes into, because this was in 2020, about if Democrats keep control of the House. So I'm going to kind of skip that and just go down here to the Public Banking Act briefly explain, because this gets into the actual meat of the act. So first things first. To be clear, the Public Banking Act isn't creating a federal public bank. This is just, again, cities and municipalities, just giving them incentives to get the ball rolling. It's not, there is going to be no federal public bank.
I wish there was.
Well, yeah, for sure. But that's just, with this particular legislation, that's just not what it is. Which I'm sure, when AOC was talking about people don't read the bill, I bet they were like, oh my god, you're going to create a federal public bank. And she's like, no, read the legislation, dude. Okay. Instead, what it does encourage and enable, what it does is encourage and enable the creation of public banks across the U.S. It provides legitimacy to those who are pushing for more public banking, and it also includes regulators as key stakeholders who can support and provide guidance for how those banks should operate. It's not that tomorrow you're going to see 1,000 of these across the country. It's still going to be a hill-by-hill, city-by-city battle, Gray said. There is a spectrum of services public banks would offer. Many would be a lot like what commercial banks do, though different public banks would likely have different areas of emphasis, at least at the outset. Some banks could serve as a depository institutions for state and local governments, meaning those governments will put their money in the local bank, not JP Morgan. And that's something I didn't know. Like, state governments put their money in, like, private banks.
Yeah.
And I did not know that.
And
that's crazy to me.
Yeah, the thing is that if you really take a look at it, like, you could create, like, public banks for, like, road infrastructure. And that's just a public bank that basically exists to basically finance road construction.
Yeah. That'd be a big one here in Utah.
States
everywhere.
Build roads. Yeah. And you could have a high-speed rail.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, man, if we could have a national public bank, we could have such good railway systems. That would be incredible.
So this is kind of just helping. This is kind of like infrastructure put into place to help facilitate those projects and fund them. And so I think to go hand in hand with those like high-speed rail, Green New Deal, road infrastructure, like internet access everywhere, I think
farming?
we're going to need these public banks.
No, like a public bank for farmers.
Yeah.
It'd be huge. Because instead of having to go to fucking Monsanto for all your finance, like, even here in Utah particularly, if you talk to farmers and you tell them that you want them to get off the back of Monsanto, take back control of their own farms, and you're going to offer them a public bank that's going to offer them financing for modest, like incredibly low interest rates.
Yep.
You think they're going to support that?
Oh, yeah, they're going to be like,
they might not be as worried about their fucking AR-15 as they are about, maybe getting, something like that passed through. I mean, this is something that if Democrats were smart, and this is the beginning tally, if Democrats were smart, we wouldn't be in this situation, but if Democrats were smart, this would be in every single newspaper, every single news station across the land, public banking for farmers, small business owners, road construction, electronics, energy, renewables, like across the board. And each city, each state, each county can basically get their own, or a state can basically run myriad of banks or help create these myriad of banks. Mm-hmm. And what will happen is, once again, these mega banks will have to restructure their patterns of behavior. Because they won't have that kind of leverage anymore.
They won't be able to aggressively just invest into risky expenditures. Oof.
Yep.
Ooh, you're getting me all excited here.
Yeah, and the public banks have more incentive for their communities to not fail, because if you had a public bank for farmers, you would care about their crops and you would care about, you know what I mean? Because they're the ones that are going to be giving that money back to you instead of just private, shareholders and whatever that are not like right there in your own community. And so you're just more involved.
Mm-hmm. And then what you do is you, once again, enforce the laws that are already on the books. So institutions like Monsanto doesn't have that kind of power over people that it does.
Yeah.
Break it up.
Yep.
Great topic so far, Garrett.
Yeah, so I'll kind of continue here. So they could engage in retail banking as well. The legislation creates a framework for public banks to interact with postal banking, where the Postal Service serves as a bank or Fed accounts, where everyone gets an account with the Federal Reserve through which they could receive direct payments from the government, for example, during an economic crisis. The bill is saying whatever you come up with, there's a place for that to be recognized and be plugged in at the federal level, Gray said.
The fact that we don't already have that is mind-boggling.
I know.
This is literally just creating accounts and having a software system and a security system with a name, a social security number, a name next to it, and location.
Yeah, and then boom, you get direct payments when there's like the pandemic, and this is actually what the next paragraph talks about. So Tlaib recalled hearing from her constituents when the $1,200 coronavirus stimulus checks went out this spring, people waiting days and weeks for direct deposits, or getting a check in the mail only to lose a substantial portion of it, cashing it at the store down the street. I'd rather them have access to a bank that's for them, that's not focused on for-profit schemes, she said. And I have a friend of mine, her dad didn't even get like a $1,200 coronavirus stimulus check.
That's what I was going to touch up on. Yep.
Yeah,
a lot of people, and then a lot of people had it like tied into debt as well. So like if they owed money, it oftentimes got pulled out before they even received it, which is crazy to me.
Because if you're in the red and if you're in the red, however much like in your bank account, and they put that in, like the bank takes how much you're in the red for.
Yep.
And so for whatever that is, but then you have less money to like pay your bills for another month or whatever it is. And so, and then obviously they have on, when you go into the red, they have the overdraft fees and all that fun stuff. So,
Jesus. I just look at that and think, how much nicer would it have been if we had something like this in place so that people could get like a direct deposit?
Yeah.
Like, and this also works for taxes too. So
tax return
would be like that quick instead of this months-long waiting for it to actually go through the whole thing. No, once it's been verified, boom, it's in that account.
Yeah, and then I mean, I'm sure people have had like, because when you have like the physical check, like people can try to steal them and like do like identity fraud, like and all this stuff, and you just get rid of all of that. Mm-hmm. I think it's an excellent idea, and I hope that they I hope this goes somewhere. Like I said, I do have an update that's from 2021. Okay. They're starting to have hearings about it, and we'll get into that, but I don't know. In the current Congress, I don't know if this will pass.
Well, I would say that what this does is provide incentive.
Yeah.
Once again, I'm gonna go after Jimmy Dore and the Muppet heads of these so-called left, who have a real hard-on for, like, the squad, when this is what the squad is delivering. Something that's actually substantial to working people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, AOC called Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear one time, and after that, Jimmy Dore just had a vendetta against her. And
on The View, to try to, like, stifle, like, freaking Whoopi Goldberg.
Well, not just that. Like, I just sit here going, okay, all it would take for something like this to take place, all it would take for the squad to become a substantial force, okay, is maybe 20 or 30 more seats.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be incredible.
20 or 30 more seats, and they're now a force that needs to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of left-leaning districts that you could possibly do this with. But instead of focusing on getting... like, you can't go with just Democrats because they're fucking compromised, right? And you can't go with, the squad because they're compromised. You have all these mini-brain jackasses talking about the Green Party and the People's Party movement. And these are non-entities. This is something substantial. This is actual bacon on the table that we could get. That would
this is exciting stuff.
How our country operates. And you have dumbasses still talking about the PPM.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not going anywhere. And the funny thing is, if the PPM actually became a political party, this is the kind of stuff that they'd be offering.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Well, I really like this, though, because, like, this isn't something a lot of lefties talk about all that much. I hadn't even really considered telling.
Like, when you would tell me, like, public option, like, I immediately think of healthcare. Like, I don't think of banks.
Like, banking, this is really cool.
I never really thought of a public bank, and so I do think, and like I said, that clip of AOC calling out people not reading her bill has been viewed over 1 million times. Mm-hmm. I love that she kind of has those, like, quips at the other side. I know some people might be like, but then you get people to click on it, and then they go and they research public banks, because they're like, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, this is, like, super fascinating to me.
I think she's so effective at doing that, and I hate people who are like, ugh, she's just like every one of the established Democrats now. It's like, come on. Like, if you believe that Nina Turner is going to win and then all of a sudden she's going to wave her magic wand and everything's going to be fixed. I love Nina Turner, but she is one person. It doesn't work that way.
And the thing that also fails about this, and this is what also frustrates me, is that it's strategically stupid. Like, what do you understand this is how our government works? AOC cannot go to Nancy Pelosi and say, you're going to pass this bill or else.
Yeah.
Like, no, you need to get X number of people to support the bill. And then you need it to go to the Senate. And then you need to hope that X number of senators are going to support it. And you know what's going to possibly happen? Even if there's a lot of support in the Senate, there are going to be amendments and revisions added to it. Why?
Yep.
Because there may be flaws, or there may be some points. And then it's going to come back to the House, and then they're going to debate that. This is a time-consuming process. But this is how the goddamn process works. It is very rare to get a bill from the House to the Senate to the President without any revisions.
Yeah, it's almost been, because again, this article was last updated October 2020. It's already been almost a year, and now we're just having hearings on it. So
yeah, it's going to take
a
time.
long process.
Yeah, it
so
takes a while.
AOC is not an advocate. She's a congresswoman.
Yeah.
Her time as an advocate is over. She now has to play politics. Surprise, surprise, a politician has to play politics in Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's mind-blowing to me that people don't comprehend that. Like, you are the okay? You need to be the one going to Nancy Pelosi's office, Representative Presley's office. You need to be going to these places. You need to be going to the Progressive Caucus and caucusing every single one of those progressives and say, support this shit, or we'll find somebody who will. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what you need to be doing, not this fucking, AOC is just the same as everybody else. Anytime you act or behave like you are in any way respecting the system that already exists right now is somehow meaning that you're a sellout. Like, how far would AOC get if she's basically just constantly calling Nancy Pelosi a bitch?
Yeah.
I get it.
Yep.
I don't like Nancy Pelosi either. But guess what? She's the most progressive Speaker of the House we've ever had.
I would take her over Mitch McConnell any day.
You and I both.
Her and Representative McCarthy from Arizona, who is basically like a sad mix between John Boehner and like Donald Trump Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus Christ, there's low hanging fruit here. This is a great bill, and this would really be meaningfully change people's lives. And
this seems like a very strong proposal.
And you're mad about what? That she didn't come onto your show? She didn't force the vote? I'm sorry, she's working on this, too. You know, Medicare for All is really important, but this is also really important.
Yeah.
I would argue that this would actually kind of make it easier for Medicare for All to happen, because then there'd be public finance in place to help the process.
That's actually where my mind's kind of going right now. Like, this opens up a lot of possibilities.
It also opens up a lot of possibilities for the Green New Deal. Because then the public banks are not the ones that you have to negotiate with. It's not the public banks. The private banks are not the ones you have to negotiate. You now have these public banks in place. So you can circumvent Wall Street to get these things done.
That want you to succeed.
It would allow government to actually govern.
This is like a really fascinating looking bill, honestly.
It's not a silver bullet, but Jesus Christ. Sorry.
So I want to talk about... Sorry, I just don't want to go on too long. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about the FDIC, or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Then we're going to talk about kind of competition between the private and public banks. We're going to get into my update, and then I think that's all I have left. So
cool. Well, you got me real curious. Real curious.
Right. Another important element, McConnell, and this is not Mitch McConnell. This is somebody else. What's his name? Oh God, I want his name. Porter McConnell, the campaign director of advocacy group Take on Wall Street. So this is not Mitch McConnell saying this.
They should put P in front of that poor man. Nobody should be just known as McConnell.
I know. All right. One another important element McConnell explained is how the legislation would change the FDIC's reticent approach to public banks. Public banks need the FDIC to provide assurances that will recognize them in accordance with the bond rating of the city or state they represent. For example, Los Angeles is a large municipality and has typically maintained a strong bond rating. McConnell said the FDIC issuing guidance that it recognizes the cities and the state's public banks as a AAA rating would send a clear direction to the state financial regulators that the public bank is considered low risk. And as we know, the FDIC, they insure up to $250,000, so you do need them on board. Mm-hmm. The FDIC needs to be convinced not to discriminate against public banks, and they need to be convinced legislatively that they should be given the same facilities, the same rights as private banks, she said. The bill would also provide a roadmap for the FDIC, which ensures bank deposits of up to $250,000, to ensure deposits for public banks so people feel assured that they won't lose all their money by choosing to open an account with their state bank instead of, say, Wells Fargo. So, I wanted to throw that out there because that is an important element because you do need that insurance so that everyone just feels even better about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. So then down here, when the public sector competes with the private sector, it's a good thing. So here's the thing about private companies, including, yes, banks. The point of them is to make money, and that drives their decisions. It's not necessarily evil, although sometimes it kind of is. I think that's putting it lightly, but sure.
Yeah.
But it's just how they work. Yeah. For example, many people in America don't have access to affordable internet because it's not lucrative for telecom companies to get it to them. The idea behind public banking isn't that Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and Morgan Stanley go away. It's that they have to compete with a government-owned entity, and one that's a little fairer and more ethical in how it does business. The potential around taking private ownership out of banking even just a little bit is huge, considering that we are depositors and we deposit $15 trillion in the commercial banking industry, and we get what? Redlined? Ethical violations in Malaysia? Fraud? Coal? Fossil fuels? All of these things are driving us towards catastrophe, said Emma Gutman-Slater, Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Field Building at the Beneficial State Foundation, a nonprofit focused on making the banking system more equitable. Public banks, as imagined in the Tlaib-Crotez proposal, would provide loans to small businesses and governments with lower interest rates and lower fees. They would potentially be better at avoiding the short-term thinking private institutions tend toward and be more willing to lend to projects with a slightly longer time horizon. There's a disinclination to believe you can make money without making money hand over fist, McConnell said. A lot of this gets at market failures. All right, and I think that's kind of all I want to go to. Yeah, because eventually it kind of, since this was in 2020, it gets into if Democrats take power. We don't need to go over that. But I want to give the last thing I want to talk about is an update, and it's just this part right here, so it'll be really quick. So this is from Democracy Now. House committee considers AOC's public banking proposal to democratize financial services. The House Committee on Financial Services held one of its first hearings on public banking this week, and this was July 23rd, so not that, like, last week. The House Committee on Financial Services held one of its first hearings on public banking this week. New York Congressmember AOC, who last year introduced the Public Banking Act, which we just talked about, with Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, said public banks would help support local economies and infrastructure and help combat inequality and structural racism in the banking industry. But most states and cities have to rely on commercial banks because there is no public option. This is Deyanira Del Rio from the New Economy Project testifying at Wednesday's hearing. Del Rio, a public bank would be chartered to serve the public good, and it would remove the profit-seeking shareholders from the equation and allow for other benefits other than maximizing profit. Rep AOC. And a public bank ostensibly wouldn't have, billionaire CEOs that are paid hundreds or thousands times the amount that their lowest employees are made. Is that correct? Del Rio, yes, that's certainly our vision for public banking. So this is also the same hearing where we got that video of AOC going after people who didn't read their bill. So those are the two updates we have now. They're having their hearings about it, and we will see kind of where it goes. But that's all awesome. I have for you guys so far.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That has me very excited, honestly, for like future prospects. So I think this could be like super, I guess, powerful to kind of like attack like current forms of power.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like looking at like how like entrenched Wall Street is and like our everyday lives and like a lot of the things that they've kind of ruined with our economy and like the U.S. as a whole. Like that's a really good way to combat them. This is awesome.
Well, it's a good way of basically turning the reverse cycle on this siphoning of wealth out of the United States. Like, I really think that I look at this as a means of giving local governments a lot more leverage in what they're wanting to do. Because oftentimes what we forget, in order for a state to do something, they have to take out a loan from J.P. Morgan. And from there, I mean, like, the roads that are being built in Utah, like, every dollar that's spent on those roads, think about the interest payment that's on top of those dollars that is going to go back to J.P. Morgan.
Yep.
Or to go back to another bank that might be the holder of Utah debt.
Yeah, that's not headquartered in that state.
And imagine if Utah had a public roads bank, a public bank for building roads and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about what would have happened if Michigan or the city of Flint had a public bank.
For like their water infrastructure.
Yeah, a lot of this is just fascinating.
Each 3 years, if they would have started this in 1990, they would have been done with it by now.
Yep.
But the thing is that we don't. This is intentionally kept that way because banks don't want to lose out on this because this is incredibly lucrative to them. And that's the first thing. Second of all, this kind of thought process, like worker co-ops, is intentionally left off the table because people, particularly people who are inside this system, don't want that competition. Same reason why they don't want a public option for healthcare.
Well, of course not. This is super dangerous to a lot of establishment stuff. Even just looking again with energy, oh my gosh, we could brush fossil fuel industries with this. This is crazy cool.
It would, like I said, it would give local and state governments the breathing room to actually enforce their laws.
Mm-hmm.
So regulations would start getting enforced again.
Yeah, in states like West Virginia that have a lot of kind of fossil fuel, people who work in that industry, you could have a public bank, kind of centered in renewable energy, and then train those people to have those jobs, so that way you're not giving them the middle finger when we, do transition to renewable energy. Sorry, one more thing I want to say, because it's in this video. I'm hoping I'm going to remember this all the way. I can't play it because it won't pick up on here. Mm-hmm. And so I do recommend everyone watch an introduction to the state banks from this bankingoncolorado.org.
It's on YouTube, right?
I believe so. I think it's just...
Click on the YouTube link.
Yeah, it's from In Context Report.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should... Hold on. Yeah, they're going to have a lot of videos, but it's just on this YouTube channel. It's two guys talking about kind of the ins and outs of the public banking, and so I would encourage everyone to go to their YouTube channel or go to this article. But basically, another point they brought out is that states have a rainy day fund where they have, a lot of money, and they don't take out a lot of it because there's that fear of losing it. Mm-hmm. But when you implement these public banks, basically, since the money stays in the state, it would give them that incentive to give out more of that money because they're going to see more of that come back in. Mm-hmm. So I think a number they throw out is, I can't remember the state, but it was they have $46 billion. They only kind of give out $3 billion of that, and then they keep it because I guess it's supposed to be a rainy day fund. Well, but then when you have these public banks, you can give out... I think they said even all of it, because you're going to see all that come in plus more from, these low interest rates. People are going to be able to pay you back better.
And then on top of it, what you'll be able to do is the big process of credit consolidation.
Yeah.
So we can begin to eliminate debt. And we'll be eliminating debt at a local level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so that's all that I have. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
I think for me, it's just that this is something I actually really want to kind of study up more on. This seems really promising for down the road.
Mm-hmm.
This is why just crying about the establishment and not being engaged in actual politics and policy is really disheartening, because this is something that I didn't even know that much about, and I consider myself a little bit of a wonk when it comes to this. But I mean, this is something this is game changing, and yet the very same people who should be the loudest cheerleaders for Rashida Tlaib and AOC are the very same people who are now basically demonizing them.
Yes,
because they're not acting the way they want their senpai to act.
Yeah,
so I think that this is once again kind of that grow up and show up. this is politics. It's messy. It's going to take time. It's not going to be neat, and there's going to be compromises. But if we keep at it and we don't stop, guess what? We can actually get shit done.
Yeah. And I just think this goes to show as well, my final thing is that AOC, like, she's just, like I said before, she's so good at just giving these clips and giving these kind of, like, you know, jabs at the other side in such a unique way that garners a lot of viewership. And then while you're at it, you can introduce people to these legislations or these new ideas. And I think this is a great example of how she's taking the fact that the news will eat this up to kind of like spread awareness of those ideas. And so, and you know, on top of that too, if you're, again, someone who leans more towards the Jimmy Dore side and you're like, wow, the squad's just not doing anything and they're, you know, now a part of the establishment, things are being done. It's just not, sometimes it just isn't talked about. I bet there's a bunch of other legislation that, again, we just haven't had like a quib that the news can kind of pull from to spread awareness. And so I want people to realize that the like progressives in Congress are working for the people. Yeah, it sometimes sucks to have to compromise, but unfortunately with the numbers that we have now, that's just kind of part of the deal. And until we can grow that, we're just going to have to try to operate the best we can. But things are being done.
And once again, like maybe some of the reasons why AOC didn't force the vote is because she had agreement with Nancy Pelosi that this was going to happen.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Like, we might not be having hearings on this right now, if not for that. So I mean, this is just part of that nitty gritty. Guess what? It's a sausage factory, but we know that. So
yeah,
let's grow up and show up, people. Come on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Well, do you guys have anything else to add?
That's it for me.
Okay. Well, this has been Goodfellas History. If you like what you heard, please comment, like, and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. And we will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.
Peace.